Hello and welcome to Philosophy Roulette number 62, I believe. So, here we go. Just gonna read some philosophy, see what happens. Alright, hope everyone's having an excellent day. All is well. Acta keep your cats indoors? Oh man, if it wasn't a reply, I'd be so excited about that. But let's click on Acta Analytica and see what is up with Acta Analytica. Well, this is looking very hopeful. Got some short papers here. Pejorative terms and the semantic strategy. Inferentialism on meaning, content, and context. On reading. Well, that sounds great. On reading? What is reading? Alright. Jeffrey Goodman. What is reading? No one knows. Why would I know what that is? Is this on? Wait, it's... What are we doing? On reading, Goodman, and it looks like this one. Okay, we've got a doc. Let's see if that works. I don't know. Hopefully, because it said it's 8 pages, but I don't trust docx files, really. So let's give me a sec to look at this. Okay, let's see. Looks pretty good. Alright, so if you are in the chat, you can type exclamation point paper, and this link will pop up if you're ever here. And there we are. Okie dokie. So, let's go. Introduction. After reading a newspaper or magazine, you may have commented that some features of the article struck a chord with you. In this workshop, we took this common sense notion of striking a chord as the starting point for considering teaching and learning through literacy. In particular, we focused on the concept of musical resonance and the associated qualities of consonance and dissonance. We describe how this RAPL conference workshop used participatory learning techniques to apply the metaphor of resonance to literacy practices. In particular, we show how understanding of acoustic resonance can provide an explanation for how literary practices in different contexts can interrelate. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so let's see what happens. So what is this? Is this like a, Alright, I was wondering if this has it was like some sort of study, but okay, whatever, gonna read it. Background. The background to the workshop is a 3-year literacy research project that seeks to understand how reading and writing in students' everyday lives can be mobilized to assist with their learning on formal courses in further education college contexts. This project involving 4 colleges in England and Scotland was entitled Literacies for Learning in Further Education. This is a terrible acronym. LFLFE? Actually, it's not that bad. LFLFE. And comes to an end in spring 2007. That's a long time ago now. In many subject areas, we have found that students' everyday literacy practices were not easily transferred into their coursework, but that they were potentially resonant with the literacy practices of their courses. They read fiction books, they read magazines, reviews, and they write their own notes, file away lists, and keep in touch with others about topics relevant to their coursework. We found that educators do not always know about this valuable resource base or know how to allow students to draw upon these practices when designing reading and writing activities for students. In this paper, we describe how participants took part in some sound-based activities that demonstrate musical resonance in practical ways. Is this the right even paper? Reading and writing resonance. I don't think this is the right one. Did I download the wrong paper? It's on reading. On reading. But this is not the right thing. Interesting. Ronnie Goodman. This looks like Jeremy Goodman. So the wrong file was downloaded. Ha. Okay. I'm like, this doesn't sound right. That was fun. Never had that happen before. Where the internet, the Googles failed me. That's kind of disappointing. I wanted that one. That sounded exciting. Oh no. Boo. Goodbye, Jeffrey Goodman. Okay, so critiques of axiological realism and surrealism. That's a little long, 13 pages, but now I'm scared. Oh, now I'm afraid. Let's just see what just came out. Maybe they've got something like super new. Back to the Branching Future. That's 1 to 14. Let's see what else we got. 1 to 15. 1 to 24. Yeah, that's not good. 1 to 13. 1 to 10. What debasing demons teach us about wisdom? I think this is one we... Did I try clicking on this before? I'm sure I did. I mean, a debasing demon sounds so exciting. Shucks. Absolutism about taste and faultless disagreement. Yeah. Let's see what else we got. Hey, how come this one didn't show up? 1 to 11. The mark of a good informant. What debasing Moorean Assertions on the normal. I mean, I have a soft spot for Moore. I really do. The first episode of this, which is not up on the internet. Oh, good, and it's here. Was a paper on Moore, actually, and it took me an hour and a half to go through it. And I had to do it in 3 parts, and I printed the paper out, and I had a videotaping myself going through the piece of paper. That was painful. I don't know if I'm going to put that up, but I feel bad because the author should... Oh no, not another DocX. I don't trust you, DocX. I feel bad because the author, I'm sure, would appreciate the feedback, you know. See. Okie dokie. No abstract. Yeah, this is what I get for not reading the abstract last time. Okay. That didn't take too long. Hi there, Silent. Moorean Assertions. On G.E. Moore's canonical view, there is something inherently absurd involved in any sincere assertion of a sentence that has one of the following syntactic forms. P, but I don't believe that P. P, but I believe that non-P. Alright, so we got more paradox styles. What was it? It usually has to do with going to the theater and about the rain or something. It's raining, but I don't believe it. Let us call the assertions that have the same form or syntax these Moorean assertions. They're called Moorean contradictions usually. Alright, whatever. It is widely accepted that the relevant philosophical literature uses Sorensen's nomenclature and calls assertions of form A omissive, for they report a specific omission of the belief that is implied by the assertion, and the assertion of the form B commissive, for they report the commission of a specific mistaken belief. Of course, although much more could be said about the distinction between these two forms of assertion, they should be enough for my purposes, for I will confine my attention entirely to the omissive form of Moorean assertions. Before doing so, I should like to provide a preliminary explanation of the absurdity involved in Moorean. It's a Moore's paradox, not contradiction. Excuse me. It's Moore's paradox. What's with the assertion here? Involved in Moorean assertions. All right, maybe my lingo's messed up. Intuitively, there appears to be a clear sense in which assertions of the form P, but I don't believe that P, are absurd. But there is much more difficult to elucidate the source of this absurdity, given the fact that there is a large body of literature on the matter. Thus, where Moore's own explanation of this absurdity is that in asserting P, we imply that we believe P, despite that in asserting P, we neither assert that we believe P, nor is our believing P entailed by our asserting P. Other authors have claimed for one reason or another that Moorean assertions are falsified by their own utterance, that they are irrational, that they cannot be asserted, and that they are always pointless assertions. that they cannot be justified, that the truth conditions of any Moorean assertion contradict its own accuracy conditions, that they cannot be known, or that they are logically odd or pragmatically self-contradictory. Of course, this list is not intended to be exhaustive, and I will make no attempt to survey in detail even the most prominent analyses of Moorean absurdity proposed in recent decades, for many authors have already done that adequately. But even on the basis of this limited survey, one might easily come to the conclusion that virtually all philosophers agree that there's something absurd or at least exceedingly odd with Moorean assertions. Yet it would be a mistake to think that the philosophical consensus about this matter is warranted, for numerous philosophers have recently attempted to provide examples of what they take to be Moorean assertions that appear not to suffer from any absurdities. Really? I haven't actually seen those, and I'm looking at this. Alright, I haven't looked at this stuff. My focus in this paper is on a particularly interesting example of a purportedly non-absurd omissive Moorean assertion that comes from John Turry. Namely, Turry presents a scenario in which Ellie, a bright and well-educated person who enjoys reading cutting-edge work in philosophy in her spare time, endorses the eliminativist view, according to which there are no propositional attitudes such as beliefs. When asked by one of her friends whether she believes that eliminativism is true, Ellie responds as follows: "Eliminativism is true, but of course I don't believe it's true." Although Turry makes it clear that eliminativism does not represent a plausible and viable position about propositional attitudes, he nonetheless maintains that Ellie's sincere, unambiguous, forthright assertion that are not only fallacious but perfectly reasonable. No one is befuddled. No one thinks them absurd because they aren't absurd, yet they fit the standard Moorean mold. Moorean assertion is not inherently absurd. If you don't have any sort of if you don't have any sort of thing that has to do with belief, like if you don't believe that there's any beliefs, then anything you say about it is in the literature is generally just ignored. You can say anything you want about things that you don't believe exist, including beliefs. So if you don't believe in propositions, you could say, of course, it's not a proposition. So it doesn't really matter. But it's sort of begging the question though against the belief part. Alright, so let's see what the author says. Turry thus concludes that this example successfully refutes the thesis that all sincere omissive Moorean assertions are inherently absurd. While I reluctantly agree with Turry that Ellie's acceptance of eliminativism can be justified, since ex hypothesi Ellie's total body of evidence supports the view that there are no propositional attitudes, I strongly disagree with his claim that Ellie's assertion eliminativism is true, but of course I don't believe it is true, is not absurd. What complicates my attempt to critically assess this claim, however, is the fact that Turry does not explicate the sense of absurd he uses. Now, if we take it, along with Moore, that an adequate explanation of the absurdity involved in the assertion of the form P, but I do not believe that P, is that in asserting P, the speaker implies that she believes P, then Turry's example is hardly convincing. For if the speaker's assertion that there are no beliefs implies her belief that there are no beliefs, then one indeed represents a paradigmatic instance of an inherently absurd assertion. But it is possible to question the assumption that our sincere assertions imply beliefs. Perhaps the most compelling way to do so is to endorse the popular view that the central normative function of assertions is not to transmit beliefs, but rather to transmit knowledge. Thus, according to Turry, by making the assertion, the speaker represents herself as knowing, not as believing. Well, that's a little... Okay, you'd have to slice up knowing and believing then, because usually if you know something, a lot of times it's justified true belief, so you're not using one of those theories of epistemology, and I'd be with you on that, but it's kind of hard to separate out believing and knowing. That this is so is shown by the fact that we can often do preface assertions with "just so you know" or other expressions implicating knowledge. For example, "just so you know X is P." On the other hand, it would be extremely odd and unusual to say, "just so you believe this, X is P." "Just so you're certain X is P." "Just so you have some evidence X is P." In Turry's view, the unusual and atypical character of such prefaces strongly supports the view that the central normative function of assertion is knowledge transmission. Now, although this view is not entirely unproblematic, let us assume for the sake of argument that it is correct. Observe that under this assumption, it becomes natural to preface one as follows. "Just so you know, eliminativism is true, but of course I don't believe it's true." In order to see how 2 is intended to be understood, several important remarks are required. First, even though Turi, or as far as I am aware any other author, does not take 2 into consideration, note that 2 fits perfectly with his view about the central normative function of assertions, according to which it is always possible to preface our assertions with the expression implicating knowledge. The second point to note is that the preface, just so you know, does not change the recognizably Moorean character of 2, that is to say, 2 still represents a Moorean assertion of P, but I don't believe that P. Third, and most importantly, note that if the normative function of the speaker's assertion is indeed knowledge transmission, then 2 seems to successfully avoid apparent absurdity of 1, that is, the absurdity that emerges from the fact that the speaker's sincere assertion that there are no beliefs implies her belief that there are no beliefs. It is worth emphasizing here that on the basis of this point, one might easily gain the impression that 2, although perhaps not 1, can enable Turi to achieve his goal, namely to construct an example that represents a genuine case of Moorean assertion that suffers from no absurdities. I wish to dispel this impression. In what follows, I will argue that the most natural interpretations of 2 are either absurd or ultimately do not represent genuinely Moorean assertions. My point is that once we include the preface that specifies a normative function of assertions, the absurdity of assertions of the form P but I don't believe that P becomes evident. The source of this absurdity will differ depending on how the normative function is specified, but the main idea comes to this. The absurdity in question is a result of the speaker's incurring a commitment specified in the preface she explicitly denies she meet in the second part of the sentence. I will consider the following 4 interpretations of 2. The speaker commits herself to transmit knowledge and expresses her lack of the relevant knowledge. The speaker commits herself to transmit a justified true belief and expresses her lack of the relevant belief. The speaker commits herself to transmit knowledge that does not entail belief, and the speaker expresses her lack of the relevant belief. And lastly, the speaker does not incur any commitment whatsoever, for there are no propositional attitudes. Despite the fact that it is possible to conceive of other interpretations of 2, I take it that the critical analysis of these 4 interpretations suffices to show the central limitations of any philosophical attempt to construct a non-absurd cases of omissive Moorean assertions by relying on their normative function, and consequently enables me to reach the general conclusion that precludes the possibility of omissive Moorean assertions that are inherently not absurd, regardless of their content, at least if we hold that our assertions ought to have some normative function. Alright, this was 1 sentence. Come on, author. You could have made like 2 sentences there at least. With these clarifications in mind, let us now consider each of these interpretations in turn. Let us start with the clearest case. If the central normative function of our assertion is to transmit knowledge, it becomes tempting to assume that we should modify 2 in such a way that, in the second part, the sentence of the speaker expresses her lack of relevant knowledge. As such, 2 should become, just so you know, eliminative is true, but of course I don't know it's true. Totally unfair? About what? That is a long sentence. That's true. I do have a beer. My argument against 3 is straightforward. If the speaker knows that she does not know that P, which is evidently the case with any speaker who sincerely utters 3, then there is a clear sense that her assertion was dishonest. Oh, you only have cold tea? Well, tea is still pretty good. Yeah, that's what it looks like. This is if you're denying it, it looks like it's a dishonest assertion. Also, I agree with this. Also, if the speaker does not know that P but asserts it anyway, then she misrepresents as having the authority to do so, and we are entitled to resent her assertion. In other words, 3 is a clear-cut case of Moorean assertion in which the speaker attempts to transmit knowledge that she herself claims she does not have. The obvious absurdity involved in 3 is therefore a result of the speaker's incurring a commitment, in this case commitment to transmit knowledge she explicitly denies she meet. In fact, this sort of absurdity is strikingly similar to the absurdity involved in the cases of performative infelicity, where speaker promises something that is, in her own opinion, impossible to achieve. I promise you the moon, when uttered in a non-figurative and perhaps non-romantic sense. Yeah, I mean, that's what I agree with this. If this is what was going on in Turi's case, I think this is good analysis. Interpretation 2. According to the traditional epistemological thesis, to know that P is to have a justified true belief that P. Is traditional epistemological thesis. I mean, if you're to believe Gettier, that everyone actually did believe it up until Gettier, and he didn't just sort of like make everyone do it by having his cool little paper. But all right, we'll assume that's traditional. We'll just call this the Gettier assumed traditional epistemological thesis. Suppose this thesis is true. In that case, I know that P. What's a footnote 12? Yeah, see, I do not know any contemporary philosophers that actually maintain this anymore because Gettier stomped on it so badly in 1963. Suppose that this thesis is true. I know that P is semantically equivalent to I have a justified true belief that P. Now I take it that the following principle about assertions is plausible. If I have asserted P and P is semantically equivalent to Q, then I have asserted Q. Suppose that I assert, just so you know, eliminativism is true, but of course I don't believe it's true. Given the principle just outlined, it follows that I've asserted, just so you know, I have a justified true belief eliminativism is true, but of course I don't believe it's true. What is wrong with 4? The main problem is that the speaker attempts to transmit one particular kind of belief, the justified and true one, that there are no beliefs. But clearly this is absurd. It might be objected, however, that the absurdity of this particular sentence depends largely on its content, for eliminativism represents the view that there are no propositional attitudes and consequently there are no beliefs. You've never heard of this sort of philosophical thing? This is the Justified True Belief Silent Lolo is there was a very famous paper. It's like less than 1,000 words in 1963 by Edmund Gettier, and it's massively I think it's like the only thing ever published, and he got famous off of it, and he's gonna be famous forever because of it. It basically puts out there some counterexamples to very wide-ranging theories of truth, and just shows that they can't possibly be right. And so this is Moore's paradox, has to do with belief, and Gettier's thing is justified true belief. So it's just a very sort of well-known theory of truth and how it relates to belief. Okay, anywho. But observe that the sense of this form would be absurd regardless of its content. Consider, for instance, the generalized formulation of 4. Just so you have a justified true belief, X is P, but of course I don't believe it's true. Again, we can see that the speaker purports to transmit one particular kind of belief, the justified and true one, in the first part of the sentence, and in the second part she explicitly says she does not have the relevant belief. The absurdity in question, is therefore a result of the speaker's incurring a commitment, in this case a commitment to transmit a justified and true belief. She denies she meet. This suffices to show that any sentence of this form is absurd. It is especially worth noting that the same conclusions follows for any other interpretation of 2 or according to which knowledge entails belief, in the sense of that believing that P is a necessary condition for knowing that P. Yeah. There is undoubtedly a philosophical tradition that to know P is to have a justified true belief that P. But what if the concept of knowledge is not understood in terms of a justified true belief? More precisely, what if we endorse the view that knowledge does not entail belief? This view could perhaps help us avoid the problem we encountered in 4, for it would enable the speaker to say, just so you know, to transmit knowledge without thereby transmitting any kind of belief. Before assessing this possibility, it is instructive to point out that in the cases where knowledge purportedly does not entail the relevant belief, the speaker does not know that she knows that P. Why don't you know that you know that P? You might know that you know that P. In fact, the speaker is surprised to learn that her answers were correct. Okay. Based on this, her assertions cannot have their typical assertoric force, and therefore cannot be prefaced with just so you know, but rather with I guess that. As such, the proposal to endorse the concept of knowledge that does not entail belief leads us to the following interpretation. I guess that eliminativism is true, but of course I don't believe it's true. Now let's see if 5 is absurd. It seems that everything turns on whether I guess that P is true entails I believe that P is true. I take it that the conceptual connection between I guess that P is true and I believe that P is true is not one of entailment. If my contention is correct, there is nothing absurd or otherwise odd about 5. It But it is also clear that in the case like 5 does not represent a genuine Moorean assertion, for there is no tension whatsoever between the first and second conjunct. That is, the speaker merely guesses that eliminativism is true, and at the same time tells us that she does not fully believe that it is true. If, on the other hand, we assume that I guess that P is true entails I believe that P is true, then 5 does indeed represent a genuine Moorean assertion, but in that case it is most certainly absurd. The absurdity in question is a result of the speaker's incurring a commitment to transfer knowledge that does entail the relevant belief she explicitly denies she meets in the second part of her sentence. Either way, we are entitled to conclude that 5 is not a genuine case of Moorean assertion that suffers from no absurdities. It might be objected that It might be objected that I misinterpreted Terry's example, for the kind of eliminativism that plays the central role in his argument was not specified about beliefs, but rather about propositional attitudes in general. As such, by uttering eliminativism is true, the speaker does not purport to transmit knowledge, belief, or for that matter, any propositional attitude. It is therefore all the more tempting to suppose that the appropriate interpretation of her sentence must leave out any preface that specifies some propositional attitude that the assertion purports to transmit. This interpretation may be put like this: eliminativism is true, but of course I do not have any propositional attitude about it. Now, we have seen that the absurdity involved in the previous interpretations of 2 was a result of the speaker's incurring commitment she explicitly denies she meets. However, this however does not seem to be the case with 6, for the speaker makes it clear that she does not incur any commitments whatsoever. Even so, I will argue in this section that 6 faces 2 very serious difficulties. First, observe that according to virtually all conceptions of sincerity in speech, our sincere assertions can only be distinguished from insincere assertions depending on whether the speaker has certain propositional attitudes toward their content. That is, the speaker's assertions are sincere only if they somehow reflect her attitude towards their content. Thus, whether we take it that sincerity in speech is to be understood in terms of first-order beliefs, second-order beliefs, or mental assent, it is clear that the speaker's propositional attitudes play a crucial role in determining sincerity of her assertions. It follows from this that the cases where the speaker does not have any attitude towards the content of her assertion, which is the case of the assertion of 6, it is impossible to distinguish whether it is sincere or not. So it's like the assertion here, like even saying this, you can't believe what they're saying at this point, because the fact that they have no propositional attitude sort of undercuts that they're asserting it to begin with, because to sincerely assert anything would require a propositional attitude. So instead of contradicting the fact that they are believing it, this one is contradicting the fact that they are asserting it. That's kind of interesting. Where was I? Now recall that Terry maintains that it is impossible to distinguish whether it is sincere or not. Now recall that Terry maintains that Ellie's assertion, eliminativism is true, but of course I don't believe it's true, is in fact sincere. If we take it that 6 represents the correct analysis or interpretation of Ellie's assertion, as I think we should, then Terry's claim becomes utterly unsubstantiated. But this is only one part of the problem, namely given Wittgenstein's famous observation that sentences of syntactic form P, but I do not believe that P must be asserted sincerely in order to represent a genuine case of Moorean assertion. See also green. The correct conclusion to be drawn is that 6 is not genuinely Moorean after all. I do not want to put too much weight on this point, however, for it does not indicate absurdity of 6, although in my opinion it most certainly indicates that 6 is deeply problematic, at least in the sense that it is questionable whether it represents a genuine case of Moorean assertion. Yeah, because if you have no way to sincerely assert, then you're not asserting something. Now we know why the author wanted to call this Moorean assertion and not Moore's paradox, because that was a setup so that they could make this point right here more stronger. Yeah. And then, in addition to the problem just outlined, note that if an assertion does not purport to transmit any propositional attitude, it is doubtful whether it can have any normative function. In order to make this point as clear as possible, a brief explanation of the normative function of assertions is called for. Thus, according to one popular line of thought, the normative function of assertions provide the rule that the speaker needs to follow in order to offer a proper assertion. More precisely, the normative function of assertions requires that the speaker stands in some specific relation to the content she asserts. That is, one properly asserts that P only if one knows that P, believes that P, or reasonably believes that P. If the speaker does not stand in the particular relation to the content she asserts, then she lacks the authority to make the relevant assertion, and as a result, her assertion is improper. Yeah, a lot of people make assertions, though, that they don't really have the relevant authority to assert. I'm not entirely sure about that, but the point overall is correct, I believe. On this line of thought, however, it is obvious that 6 cannot have any normative function. The problem here is not that the speaker of 6 does not stand in some specific relation to the content she asserts. It is rather that she does not stand in any relation to this content. But then to make an assertion that does not have any normative function strikes me as absurd. It's like, why are they talking? The absurdity in question emerges from the fact that the speaker makes an assertion that by her own acknowledgement lacks a crucial condition on the basis of which it can be assessed as a proper assertion. I think that the two difficulties outlined in this section provide good reason for the rejection of the assumption that 6 can represent a genuine case of Moorean assertion that suffers from no absurdities. Yeah, it's like this has gone to like the meta level instead of like going from belief. It's going from assertion and then to grounds for assertion. And so if you go up those like sort of levels, it doesn't really save you. You just run into the same problems over, but at the different levels. Okie dokie. I hope to have successfully demonstrated that all 4 interpretations of 2 are deeply problematic in the sense they are either absurd or do not represent genuine Moorean assertions. This conclusion decidedly precludes the possibility of genuine omissive Moorean assertions that are inherently non-absurd, at least if we hold that our assertions ought to have some normative function. Furthermore, I take it that the conclusion of this paper is fully compatible with all leading contemporary approaches to belief, including representationalism, dispositionalism, functionalism, interpretationalism, and perhaps somewhat surprisingly, eliminativism. It is also worth noting that this conclusion is not limited to Moorean assertions about eliminativism, for it precludes the possibility of genuine omissive Moorean assertions that are inherently non-absurd regardless of their content. As such, it seems to me that all of the following general assertions are either absurd or do not represent genuine Moorean assertions. Just so you know, X is true, but of course I don't know it's true. Just so you have a justified true belief, X is P, but of course I don't believe it's true. I guess that X is P, but of course I don't believe it's true. X is P, but of course I do not have any propositional attitude about it. If this is correct, it follows that authors who attempt to present examples of Moorean assertions that suffer from no absurdities have to provide a persuasive argument that shows that these assertions can have at least some normative function. However, based on the points that are developed and defended in this paper, it is highly doubtful that such an argument can be given. Needless to say, this is often overlooked conclusion in the philosophical literature about Moorean assertions. I should go look into some of these like people who are saying that you can make Moorean assertions that are non-absurd. The closest I've seen was someone made an argument that basically it was like you had to be sort of had like a phobia, so you were sort of like speaking out of two sides of your mouth. Basically, you were like something, but I don't believe it. Like you know you're not supposed to be afraid of, like, say you have a phobia of like glasses of beer, and you know you're not supposed to be afraid of it. So it's like, I'm afraid, but I don't believe it, or like, I'm not afraid and I don't believe it, because it's in some sense you don't believe yourself because you know it's irrational. Now I understand that, but it was an explicitly psychological problem that they were pointing to that would make it reasonable for you to say something under certain conditions, but they knew it was absurd. You had to have some sort of phobia, basically, something out of your own control that's part of your psychology that would allow you to say things like this. But other than that, I haven't read the article, but it does seem like it was reasonably well argued here. And I do fear, although of course I don't know the rest of the literature here, that this is a little too all the examples that are given, this may have cherry picked some of them, but I have no idea. It's just like, these are the bad ones. You shouldn't do these bad things. But I mean, I'm completely with the author here. Like, I can't really see how Moore's paradox or Moorean assertions are going to be made okay. No one, as far as no one I've ever spoke to thought they sounded fine to them. Okay, so that's it for now. I hope everyone has a good day. And, yeah, let's see. Oh, this is like slightly... Oh, this is my fault. I can't see the chat right here. Oh, well. It doesn't matter. Have a good day, all, and I'm gonna be back, tomorrow morning. So, that's it for now. Stay safe, and have a good night. I'll be in chat for a minute. Thanks for watching, Silent Willow. Have a wisen. Appreciate it.